Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. We start today hadith number 152, Bab al-Wudu bil-Mad, or bil-Mud. This chapter titled Making Wudu with a volume of water that was called Mad or Mud. A Mud is like this. This is a Mud. A handful. Right, but like two handfuls, so to speak. This is a Mud. Right. So وعنه يعني عن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يغتسل بالصاع إلى 5 أمداد ويتوضأ بالمد. So here Anas رضي الله تعالى عنه says that the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام would perform ghusl using a volume of water that they called sa', or to 5 full handfuls, and he used to make wudu with this much water. A sa' is 4 of these. A sa' is about 4 of these. Of course, this is all in approximation, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, the amount of water he would use to perform ghusl was maybe a full water bottle, of a standard water bottle, maybe a little bit more, right? And a mud is about maybe half of a water bottle, something along those lines. So that's how much he would use to make wudu. And I don't remember if I've already presented this to you all, but when it comes to water usage, right, what are the ethics, or what is the ethic when it comes to using water as per Islam? And the answer is, right, if I've already said it, then I'm, as a refresher. And the answer is, when it comes to acts of worship, Islam wants us to be conservative. Right? Use as little as you need, right? But when it comes to just regular routine things like taking a shower, not for the sake of ghusl, but just for the sake of taking a shower, or brushing your teeth or whatnot, you have the freedom. Of course, it's always better to be conservative, just for the sake, because it's more logical, right? But when it comes to acts of worship, this is where we have some references from Quran and or Sunnah to use minimal, to use what you need, right? Now, how does that translate for us today? What it translates to is, not to literally take a cup of water, or a cup and fill some water and do it that way, but when you turn on the faucet, turn it on a little bit light. If you're just taking a shower for the sake of ghusl, just for ghusl, then make it a quick one, right? So there is that concept. And so what we take from the hadith is as I just mentioned, when you make wudu, make sure the faucet is low. Don't turn it on maximum. Bab al-Masah al khuffayn, a chapter about wiping on one's socks. So a khuf, there were different words for different types of socks based on material, cloth. A khuf, if I'm not mistaken, is a sock that was from leather, right? And so they would wrap it around their feet. It's not like today where it's tailored to the foot, where you could just kind of put it on. No, they would actually wrap it around the foot the way a cast or medical tape is wrapped around a part of the body, right? That is a khuf. There are other terms like al-jawrab. Jawrab is a little bit more close to what we know today as a sock, right? So there were different kinds of cloth that they would use to put their feet in, or to wrap their feet in. عن سعد بن أبي وقاص رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه مسح على الخفين وأن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما سأل عمر عن ذلك فقال نعم إذا حدث شيئا سعد عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فلا تسأل عنه غيره. So here Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas is one of the 10 who are given glad tidings of paradise. And Sa'd, as I'll get to here in a second, Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala an says that the Prophet ﷺ would wipe on his leather socks. Okay, we know what that looks like. Basically, you wet your hands, and then with your fingers separated. You just start with your toes, and you go up to where the foot starts to become the leg, that area.
You do it simultaneously?
Simultaneously, once. All right? That's how it's performed. Now, what counts as, or what qualifies, I should say, what qualifies as a khuf today? Right? What qualifies today as something that if it's on your feet, you're allowed to wipe over it? In the books of fiqh, you'll find different criteria that needs to be met. You will hear things like, if there's a hole in the sock, you can't wipe on it, right? Criteria like, it needs to be stern enough, thick enough to where you can walk on it long distances without it falling apart. Another criteria that you'll come across is, it needs to be on the foot in a way that it doesn't fall off, meaning it's not loose. So you find these criteria. So where is that coming from? Where it's coming from is the qualities of this khuf. The Prophet ﷺ wiped on something specific, his khuf. So the scholars looked at the khuf and said, okay, what needs to be on the foot must be similar to this, similar in its characteristics or its attributes. Right. No, hold on. So step by step, right? But you get the point here? If you imagine this old style of wrapping one's foot using leather, they would wrap it around the foot to where it's stuck on the foot. It's not going to fall off. Or it's not going to sag down while you're walking. And the material of leather is strong enough to where you can travel long distances while wearing this without it falling apart, right? So basically they said that let's ignore, or some scholars said you can't even ignore the material. Some scholars today, you'll hear them saying it can only be a leather sock that you can wipe on, right? But let's just ignore that for a second and look at the other things. Okay, so today, accordingly, you'll find many scholars, reputable scholars, saying that if your socks have holes in them, you can't wipe on them. If your socks are worn out to where they're loose and they're falling off, you can't wipe on them. If your socks are transparent, right? I wouldn't call that transparent, but what women tend to wear, the very, very thin sock, right? That literally you can see through it. And say you can't wipe on that because it does not meet the attributes of a khuf. That's one opinion, and that opinion is legitimate. The other opinion, and the one that I follow, right, is that it has nothing to do with the attributes that the Prophet ﷺ, or what they used to use back then. It has to do with the name. The name. In other words, a khuf was a name, is a word used to refer to something that covers the foot. So in our times today, so long as it covers the foot, right, it covers the foot, then that's enough. The other characteristics or attributes are irrelevant. Just because the khuf was like that does not necessitate that it needs to be exactly the same. And therefore, if you have a hole in your sock, not a problem. So long as it's still called a sock, you can wipe on it. If it's transparent, not a problem. So long as it's called a sock, something that is used to cover the foot. All right? So this is the opinion that I follow. And I think it's a correct opinion. Wallahu ta'ala alam. But again, if you've heard what I just explained from others, it's a legitimate opinion. It goes back to scholarship, right? But the opinion that I follow is so long as it covers your foot, including the ankle, right? And it's called a sock or a derivative or a synonym of a sock, then that's what's necessary. You can wipe on that, yeah, no problem.
No, because back, I think, sometime you mentioned that, so ever since when I wear these socks, then I wipe on them. But when you said the first time, I was like, oh boy, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there's a certain condition that needs to be met there's another condition that needs to be met aside from what I just explained right now, and that is it needs to be worn after making wudu. Right? So you make wudu, washing your feet, and then you wear your socks. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ says, I don't know if we're coming on it, but just in case it's not present in Bukhari, Prophet ﷺ says, you're allowed to wipe on your socks for 5 salahs. Okay? For 5 salahs. Now scholars differed in terms of when exactly that begins, but in general, just to make it easy and not to go into the nuanced discussion, if you pray 5 salahs wearing that sock, after the 5th one, you cannot pray another salah until you wash your feet. Right? So for example, let's say you got up today, right? You've already prayed Fajr, you get up in the morning, do your breakfast and get ready, and before coming here, you made wudu and then you wore your socks and you come here. The first salah you're going to pray while wearing socks is Dhuhr. So you have Dhuhr is 1, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and let's just say you got lazy at night and you fell asleep in your socks. You get up and you wipe on your socks for Fajr. That's 5 salahs. After this, you can't pray Dhuhr until you wash your feet. Right? Now this is if you are home. You're not traveling. If you are traveling, you have 15 salahs. 15 salahs. Now again, in our minds, who on earth is me wearing the same socks 3 days in a row? No, sunnah is irrelevant. We're talking about the 5, the daily prayers, right? The obligatory prayers. Now, I hope nobody's wearing the same socks for 3 days, especially while traveling, right? It's bad enough in an airplane. Right? And airlines and international travel are courteous enough, after they overcharge us for everything, they're at least courteous enough to give us socks, right? But back in the day, you're talking about it's leather. Right? And they're traveling. And this is kind of their shoes back in the day. They didn't have shoes like us. They would travel wearing leather, or they would ride their horse, and to make it a little bit more comfortable for their feet, they'd be wearing leather. And it's very difficult to it's inconvenient to take the leather off. Right? You're wrapping it around, and then you're removing it and whatnot. So you have 15. Now, if you're wearing your socks, let's put it this way. If you remove your socks, right, while not having wudu on your feet, after washing your feet, then you can no longer wipe on the socks. So, you made wudu, you wash your feet, you wore socks, and then you lost your wudu, and then you take off your socks, right? You took off your socks, and you no longer have wudu now. Here, you can't just wear your socks again and wipe. You have to make wudu, right? Also, let's say I made wudu wiping on my socks, and I remove my socks. I haven't used the bathroom or passed gas or anything like that, but I removed my socks, which I wiped on. Does that invalidate my wudu?
No.
Right?
Yes, if you still have wudu.
No, Sheikh.
No.
Oh, we got
No, because
we got yeses and nos.
you haven't used the washroom or anything, so you still take the socks.
No, you didn't wash your feet. You wiped on your socks. And then you remove the socks that you wiped on to make wudu.
But the criteria is
Sarah? Hold on, let's see. Let's test the students of IOK here. Sarah, what do you?
I would say, since you already removed it and repeat your wudu, then it didn't invalidate your wudu.
No, you didn't repeat wudu. You made wudu on your socks. And then you remove the socks afterwards.
Then it's invalid.
It's invalid. Regardless, you just remove the socks.
if you didn't use
Where is Shamima here? Yeah, she is. Come on, I'm putting you on the spot, Shamima. Huh? Is your wudu invalid?
So the question, you make the wudu, and then
You wiped on your socks for wudu. So you removed your hadath by wiping on your socks. And then later, you remove your socks that you wiped on. You haven't used the bathroom, you haven't invalidated your wudu through a hadath, but you remove the socks which you made wudu on. Do you still have wudu after removing the socks?
The way I have learned, Sheikh, as far as I remember, you just have to wash the feet and wear the socks again.
Okay.
You don't have to make the whole wudu.
Okay. So Sarah says that your wudu is invalid. You have to remake wudu, and then Shamima says that you have to wash your feet and then you can put your socks back on. So you don't have to make wudu all over again. You just have to wash your feet, right? Just wash your feet, not make wudu entirely. You just wash your feet, all right? Right? So you understand the picture? I made wudu, right? I made full wudu and I wiped on my socks. So now I have wudu. If I wanted to pray, I could pray. But then for whatever reason, I removed my socks. I made wudu while wiping on the socks. And then I removed those socks. Right? One opinion, or what was mentioned, is that you could wash your feet. You don't have to do wudu all over again. You wash your feet, and then you have your wudu. You maintain your wudu. Right? What's interesting is that they studied on the same sheikh. So that's funny. We had to see how that happened. Maybe Sheikh Farhan switched his opinions or something like that over the years.
But Sheikh, that doesn't make sense. Because us you cannot do one and then come back to the other.
Right. So there are three opinions in this regard. One opinion is that your wudu is entirely invalid. You have to remake your wudu.
Whose opinion is that?
I forgot who. There are two of the schools who have this opinion.
Okay.
Right? You have to make wudu all over again from the start. Second opinion is that all you need to do is wash your feet and you maintain your wudu so long as you wash your feet immediately after taking your socks off. You maintain wudu. And then a third opinion, which within the scholarly, community, they view as a weaker opinion. While I disagree, but just for the, not to make this too long, a third opinion is that even if you take your socks off, you still have wudu. Right? So, should I go into where are these different opinions coming from? Well, number one, there is no clear hadith in this regard, as far as I know. So we don't have guidance from Quran and Sunnah that has determined for us how to do this. So now we have to answer this question because this isn't a hypothetical situation. This is real, right? So, well, how do we go about doing it? It really goes back to how do we understand this idea of removing spiritual impurity? Right? How does that work? And how do we understand this alternative of wiping your feet? Wiping your socks, I should say, is an alternative to something original, and that is washing your feet. It's an alternative. So on the first opinion, right, they see it as the following. Your spiritual impurity was removed by wiping on the socks. And by removing your socks, what you did to remove the spiritual impurity has been removed from you. So you go back to spiritual impurity, right? And don't think too hard about this. I'm just trying to maybe be a little bit entertaining here. You have to start all over again. The second opinion is removing your socks is not a form of spiritual impurity. Remember when we said there are certain things that if you do, you become spiritually impure? Removing your socks is not one of them, right? But at the same time, they understand the point of view of the first opinion. So they said, we'll have a little bit of a in-between here. Go wash your feet, and then you maintain that wudu. The third opinion said the following. If you remove your spiritual impurity, nothing returns that except doing that which requires you to make wudu. And since removing your socks is not one of them, why do we need to be all complicated and say you need to make wudu again when your wudu is already there? You've already removed your spiritual impurity. That's what needs to happen in order to perform salah. So if you wiped on your socks, you have removed spiritual impurity. And removing your socks is not one of the forms of spiritual impurity. Right? So even if you remove your socks, you still have wudu. These are the 3 opinions. What I normally tell the public is, if you take off your socks, wash your feet. This is what I normally tell the public.
So if you take your socks off right after you break them, okay, until Asr time, and you did not lose your wudu, but still you have to make a new wudu, because you cannot just wash your feet and.
No, if you're gonna wash your feet, it has to be immediately after removing your socks,
Yes.
not until Asr.
That's what I'm saying. So it depends when you moved your socks to whether you have to do wudu or you don't have to do wudu.
Forget, I'm saying you just want to keep your wudu. It's not about I'm going to pray now. I removed my socks because I'm home now. I don't want to be walking around home in my socks. But I don't want to lose my wudu, so I'm just going to go quickly wash my feet so I still have wudu, so that when I need to pray again, I don't need to make wudu again.
Just right after you
Yes.
remove your socks, just wash your feet. And
Yes.
then you're okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Make sense? All right. Anyway, so going back to the hadith, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu ta'ala an says that the Prophet ﷺ would wipe on his socks. And Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, the son of Umar ibn Khattab, asked his father, is this true? Right? And Umar said, of course. And he says to his son, if Sa'd says anything about the Prophet, you take it and you don't ask. Yeah, you take it and you don't ask. Why is Umar saying this? Right? Remember, what some people think is that Muslims just, if a Muslim says it, we believe it. If Bukhari says it, we believe it, just because it's Bukhari who said it. If a companion says it, we believe it simply because a companion said it. Umar was not like that. Umar radiallahu ta'ala an once heard someone reciting the Quran in a way, he recited the verses in a way different than how Umar had it memorized. And what did he do? He went to that man and said, why did you recite the Quran that way? It's wrong. And the man said, I heard the Prophet say it that way. He taught me these verses this way. And Umar got really aggressive. He said, absolutely not. There's no way. Right? And he took them and he literally dragged the man to the Prophet. Another example, Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala an, he went to Umar's home and he knocked on the door once, nobody answered. He knocked twice, nobody answered. Knocked the 3rd time, nobody answered, and then he left. So Umar called him and said, why did you leave after the 3rd knock? He said, I heard the Prophet say that if you knock 3 times and nobody answers, then you leave. And Umar said, you need 2 witnesses who heard the Prophet say the same exact thing, or else I'm gonna not that, I'm gonna discipline you. Right? So Umar is the last person to just accept what people say, even the companions. So why does he say, if it's Sa'd who says something, take it? The reason is Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas was always by the side of the Prophet ﷺ in travel, especially in military expeditions. So something like wiping on one's socks, which was more common in traveling, no doubt Sa'd was there. No doubt. Right? On top of that, Sa'd is one of the people who was promised paradise. Right? And he's one of the first Muslims. He's one of the ones who endured some of the most, difficult times of Islam. And so Umar is telling his son, the Prophet has testified to this man being in paradise. He's not going to be a liar. So take from him. All right. Next hadith عن عمرو بن أمية الضمري رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه رأى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يمسح على الخفين وعنه رضي الله تعالى عنه قال رأيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يمسح على عمامته وخفيه. So the first of these 2 hadith is similar to the previous one. This companion saw the Prophet wipe on his feet. And then the 3rd hadith here, the companion says that I saw the Prophet ﷺ wipe on his imamah, his turban, and his feet, and his socks, Why is Bukhari here adding extra emphasis? Like most of the hadith Most of these chapters have just one hadith, maybe two. So why is he going a little bit above here? And the answer is, some people deny wiping on the socks. They deny and say, no, this is not part of the Sharia, and no, it is. In fact, it is massively transmitted that the Prophet ﷺ wiped on his feet. You have thousands of people, if not tens of thousands of people, who traveled with the Prophet ﷺ and must have seen him wipe on his feet. So it's definitely part of the religion. Now, I've already explained to you all wiping on the turban. So back in the day, but to re-explain, just in case somebody didn't see that part or has forgotten. Back in the day, a turban was worn how? They would wrap it around their heads, wrap it. And it would come and wrap the neck and come under the chin, and it would be tied. This way, when they're on their horses, it doesn't fly off. All right? And they would wrap their head so that it protects them from the sun and from the direct heat. Also, you'd find them commonly even wrap or cover their mouths and their noses. And it's very bizarre because you think, it's incredibly hot out there. Why would they wrap themselves up? Even so, right? I guess the sand is part of it and the sun is part of it, but why? It would be so hot. I'd rather just wear sunscreen, right? Well, the idea is, what is the human body's temperature? 98 point whatever, right? If it's 114 degrees outside, which is common for an Arabian summer, if you are, the heat coming out of your mouth is cooler than the heat outside, right? So they would do this. And this is also why people would sleep in caves, because the earth is always a certain temperature, regardless of what it is outside. So if it's hotter than it, it's cooler in the cave, but if it's colder than it, it's warmer in the cave. Right? So, like socks, including the same conditions as socks and the same rulings, the fiqh aspect of wiping on socks is the same for wiping on whatever covers the head, and hijab counts as well. Because it's the same idea. A lady is wrapping her head and it's tied under her chin, covering her neck and the entirety of her head. So if she wipes on it, that's perfectly fine. باب إذا أدخل رجليه وهما طاهرتان. The chapter of inserting your feet while in a state of wudu. Right? So let's see what this means. عن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كنت مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر فأهويت لأنزع خفيه فقال دعهما فإني أدخلتهما طاهرتين فمسح عليهما. So this is what I already explained here. Al-Mughira says that he was traveling with the Prophet, so he went down to remove the Prophet's socks. Right? So the Prophet said, leave them because I put my feet in those socks while having wudu. So this just explains the evidence to what I already explained, what you all already know, and that is a condition for wiping on one's socks is that you must have performed wudu, washing your feet before wearing your socks. باب من لم يتوضأ من لحم الشاة والسويق or السويق. The chapter of not making wudu after consuming meat or sawiq. What's sawiq? Sawiq, I believe, is look it up. But if it's a type of food that they used to have, I think they used to cook on fire. But we'll get here in a second. عن عمرو بن أمية رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه رأى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يحتز من كتف شاة فدعي إلى الصلاة فألقى السكين فصلى ولم يتوضأ. So this companion says that he saw the Prophet ﷺ eating the meat from the shoulder of a sheep. Now the Prophet ﷺ, his favorite part of the sheep was the shoulder. Why? Because it's away from kind of the digestive system, right? So he used to love that part.
قال
What is it?
السويق السويق طعام يؤخذ من مدقوق الحنطة والشعير سمي بذلك سياقه في الحلب وجمع السوق.
Yeah. So it's a type of wheat or barley food that they would grind the wheat or the barley, right, and they would cook it in a certain way.
That's meat, right?
Hmm?
No, it says
No, it's not meat.
It's grains.
just-
I'll explain the difference here in a second. So the Prophet ﷺ ate lamb meat, goat meat, and then he was called for salah. So the Prophet put down the knife that he was eating with, and he didn't make wudu. Meaning he went and he prayed without making wudu. Okay, kind of obvious, right? So why is this being mentioned? The reason it's being mentioned is that there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, or he encouraged making wudu after consuming camel meat. And there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is said to have said or mentions or encourages making wudu after eating something that is fatty. And another hadith encouraging wudu after eating something that has been cooked on fire. Okay? So you have this here. What is this hadith doing? Well, one thing it's doing is telling us that camel meat and sheep meat aren't the same. They're not. In other words, the reason why the Prophet ﷺ is encouraging wudu after eating camel meat is something unique to camel meat that lamb meat is different from. What is it? Now, I don't know if you had the opportunity to eat camel meat. It tastes like lamb. I mean, it's nothing, or beef, but it's rougher, it's thicker, so it's harder for the body to digest. And when the body's trying to digest it, it's going to increase the heartbeat, and it's going to cause a little bit of fatigue. You know how when you eat and you get tired because now your body's working, and also it heats up the body. And there are certain meats that when you eat it, it makes you warmer. So for example, in Central Asia, they love horse meat and horse milk. Why? There's something about it that when they eat it or they drink the horse milk, it gets them hot. Like I had somebody who I studied with in Jordan who visited Kazakhstan, and they told him, here, drink this horse milk. And he said it's dead of winter, and like he's wearing layers and it's super cold. It's a cold area. So he says within 15 minutes of drinking that horse milk, I was taking off my layers. I was so hot. So this is one of the ways that they would keep warm, right? So the Prophet ﷺ encouraged making wudu after eating camel meat to cool down the body and to replenish the body's strength, right? There's a reason why ghusl is obligatory after certain things. I don't know the science behind it, but in general, scholars have said that, it helps the body replenish itself. You know how when you go on, like you've been walking outside under the sun a lot, and you feel tired as a result of that, but then you go take a shower and it rejuvenates you? Like, I don't know the science behind it, but there's something about this putting water over you that is replenishing to one's energy or strength. Now, all of these that I just mentioned, in terms of the Prophet encouraging wudu after consuming certain things, the opinion that I follow is that all of this is an encouragement. It's not an obligation. Why is it an obligation? Because these aren't forms of spiritual impurity. Right? It has nothing to do with spiritual impurity. And the reasoning behind them seems more about, as I just mentioned, replenishing one's strength than it does spiritual. Right?
Is horse meat halal to eat?
Yes, horse meat is halal to eat, but the Hanafis and the Malikis are between seeing it as discouraged or prohibited. But why? Those who said it's discouraged, they looked at it more from a economic perspective. That horses were the mounts back then, as well as the cavalry of an army. And so there was a general interest that there was a general interest for there to be more horses available, so that the more supply there is, the cheaper it is. So people had more access to horses for their own personal use, and there was an abundance of horses for military use. That's not the case today, right? No one's doing this. Those who said it's haram, such as like the Hanafis or some Hanafis, they looked at the verse وَالْخَيْلَ وَالْبِغَالَ وَالْحَمِيرَ لِتَرْكَبُوهَا وَزِينَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala references, he mentions khayl, which is horses, bighal, which are mules, and hamir, which are donkeys. Now, donkeys and mules are impure. They're impure. So they said, okay, why is Allah mentioning horses with these others? They said, well, we can't say it's impure, but maybe the similarities that none of them are allowed to be consumed. A mule is a hybrid between, or a crossbreed between a donkey and a horse, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Right. But the opinion that I follow is that it's permissible.
But why, I wonder why hamar is impure.
So an animal's impurity is not scientific based. It is purely because Allah and His Messenger said so.
Yes, I know. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying, I'm wondering, where do we have the information about that being impure?
Yeah, so the fact that it's haram to eat.
Yeah, the fact that
It's haram to eat.
But where is that? Where did that come from?
So when the companions were going to Khaybar, they started cooking, and they slaughtered a donkey, and they started cooking the meat. So the Prophet ﷺ said, I believe he said it's rijis, it's impure, and he also commanded them to wash the cauldrons or the pots that they were using to cook it. So he would only say that if it's impure. All right. Okay. باب من مضمض من السويق ولم يتوضأ. The chapter about washing one's mouth after consuming certain foods, but not making wudu. عن سويد ابن النعمان رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه خرج مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عام خيبر I just came up حتى إذا كانوا بالصهباء وهي أدنى خيبر فصلى العصر ثم دعا بالأزواد ثم فلم يؤت إلا بالسويق فأمر به فثري فأكل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأكلنا ثم قام إلى المغرب فمضمض ومضمضنا ثم صلى ولم يتوضأ. So here they were traveling to Khaybar. They reached a certain place prior to kind of within the borders of Khaybar. So Khaybar is about 200 kilometers north of Medina. All right. So 200 kilometers, about 130, 120 miles north of Medina. And it's a big area. Right? Khaybar was a large area back in the day. And if you go there now, it's pretty much empty. It's not really residential these days. But if you go there, you'll see a lot of the remains from back in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where you'll find fortresses there. You'll find really large fortified areas. So it was pretty lively during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ prayed Asr, and he called for al-azwad or zad, food. He said, "Come, let's eat." And the only thing that they had was this sawiq, this wheat or barley concoction or food. So the Prophet ﷺ ate, and we ate, and then he prayed Maghrib, or he stood up to pray Maghrib, and he washed his mouth, and we washed our mouths, and he prayed without making wudu. So it goes back to what I said. Why did he wash his mouth? My guess is that he didn't have a siwak. So we know that the Prophet ﷺ said, if it wouldn't be difficult for my ummah, I would command them to brush their teeth with the siwak, or just brush their teeth prior to every wudu or prior to every salah. Right? So either he didn't have a siwak, so he went to the next thing, and that is to wash his mouth with water. So why would the Prophet what's he encouraging when he says brush your teeth? He's encouraging fresh mouth, right? A fresh breath, or at least not a stinky breath. What causes bad breath? Well, one of the causes is food getting stuck between the teeth and being there for a while, and it starts to gather bacteria, and that's where the bad smell comes from. So by washing or cleaning one's teeth, being around people is a little bit more pleasant. So if you don't have, a siwak or a toothbrush, what's the next best thing? Water, right? Now, interestingly enough, growing up or decades ago, how many times were we encouraged to brush our teeth? Like dentists, how many times would they encourage to brush? Twice a day, right? Morning and before going to sleep, right? Well, I had a conversation with a cousin of mine who's a dentist, and he said, more current research is better understanding what causes cavities. All right, we'll wait for that. لا إله إلا الله. So apparently the way cavities grow is that a cavity starts off as a bacteria, right? So there's bacteria lingering in your mouth. And bacteria grows by feeding on what you eat, what comes in your mouth. So there are certain things that it's more nourishing for the bacteria, like sugar, and there are things that are less nourishing for bacteria. So every time you eat, that bacteria is getting bigger, right? It's growing. And what removes the bacteria is wiping, taking something to wipe the teeth or brush it. And it kills it, or at least it removes it and it goes elsewhere. So he said that every time you eat, just have a toothbrush or something and just quickly wipe, right? Similar to dust, dust comes, if you wipe it, it's clean. And a little bit more dust comes, you wipe it, it's clean, like that. So I said, subhanAllah, I always wondered why the Prophet said after, or with every wudu or before every salah. It's 5 times. Dentists are saying twice. And now you get the benefit. Because you're eating multiple times a day. Normally it's 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and you probably have a few snacks here and there, right? So if you just quickly wipe your teeth or brush your teeth very quickly after each time you eat, your teeth are going to be, mashallah, right? And I remember another dentist, he said if after every time you eat, if you don't have a toothbrush, take some water, wash your mouth and spit it out, like that. So, Allahumma salli wa sallim ala nabiyyina Muhammad. All right. عن ميمونة رضي الله تعالى عنها أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أكل عندها كتفا ثم صلى ولم يتوضأ. Similar to before, Maymuna, the wife of the Prophet رضي الله تعالى عنها, said that the Prophet ate by her a shoulder and he prayed without making wudu. باب هل يمضمض من اللبن. So the chapter, should one wash their mouth after drinking milk or having yogurt? So why this? It's fatty. Right? As I mentioned before, it's fatty. عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم شرب لبنا فمضمض وقال إن له دسما. So the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام drank yogurt or milk and he washed his mouth and he said because there is fat. Now I don't know what fat means for teeth in terms of teeth, the health of teeth, Allah Ta'ala alam. But the idea is the things that were mentioned right now in terms of what was consumed by the Prophet, none of them require wudu afterwards. The only thing that requires wudu afterwards are the things that you already know. Using the bathroom, going to sleep, losing consciousness, among other things. Right? Allah ta'ala alam. Let's go ahead and stop there. Hadith number 161. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.